Rachel Ann Goodman. Thank you for joining me for a series of candidate interviews for the City Council of the City of Santa Cruz. Today I'm talking with Drew Glover, who is running for City Council. Hi, Drew.
Hi.
Hi, thanks for being here. So the question I've been asking everybody is, who are you and why do you want to run for the seat?
Yeah, well, it's a good question.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me on the show, first of all.
You're welcome.
Well, I was born and raised in Santa Cruz, in the city specifically. I've moved around from the Aptos area to the Branciforte, Seabright, and all the way out to Scotts Valley, but I've lived within Santa Cruz for the majority of my life. I graduated from Harbor High School in 2003, which was really wonderful. Senior class president, it's a great school. Yeah. And then I went to Cabrillo to continue my study in sociology, but I ended up leaving town for a few years to be a photographer after I had a bout with cancer, which was kind of a bummer, but it was a really I try to look at the positives of things, and it was a wonderful opportunity to kind of get a taste of mortality and understand how valuable life is. I always tell people that was when I was first able to enjoy a view, was after I had spent all that time in a hospital bed. But after coming back to Santa Cruz, I re-enrolled in Cabrillo and continued my studies there, but created a nonprofit organization called Project Pollinate, which has given me a great opportunity to engage with a lot of different organizations. It's an organization specifically designed for environmental sustainability and community building. And so it has given me a wealth of opportunity to work with cross-sections of Santa Cruz nonprofit organizations, different community groups, and just kind of really understanding what's been going on within the landscape of Santa Cruz over my entire life, which I wasn't aware of until I got back and started participating in the local kind of politics and advocacy work and all that, but then really gave me an idea of the issues that are facing Santa Cruz and what needs to happen.
Well, let's rip right into some of those issues. And let's start with the environment, since you began talking about your background in that area. How do you think this city is doing, and what would a policy response be to improving some of what's going on with our environment? I think immediately of the river.
Absolutely. So the river is a big issue. I actually had a chance to meet with a few different community members about it since I've been in the race talking about some of the issues that are important to them. The river is an incredibly important resource for Santa Cruz. It's beautiful, and it's the home of like over 100 different species of birds that operate and live out of the brush and the trees and all this other kind of stuff. It's a shame how underserved the river is, in the sense that there's massive amounts of garbage, the water's polluted, and even the way that the forestry and shrubbery is managed. I mean, I understand there's an issue with the flood prevention and the agreement with the Army Corps. However, I was shown some documentation for the requirements of the Army Corps that, in the opinion of certain community members, are being overstepped by the way that the brush is being removed, negatively impacting the river. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff that goes in, and there's also the question of recreational activity on the river and whether that's a good or a bad thing. You know, I personally am of the mind that it could potentially be negative for the river to be used on a recreational basis based off of the way that it's being treated right now. I don't know how beneficial it would be to have people out on the water already disturbing the already disturbed wildlife and all of that. But, you know, it's really interesting because some people make the argument that increased access to the river would mean increased responsibility. But I would encourage them to look at mountain bike trails, for example, and how that was initially designed to be a small impact activity, but has turned out to be pretty detrimental to certain environmental areas.
Really good points, very interesting. So let's talk about a bigger, more crunchy issue like climate change. There is a climate action plan sitting there. What kind of responses would you think a city council looking ahead to both mitigation of what some of the impacts could be to our town being low-lying by the river, and maybe some prevention things by reducing emissions? There's a really different responses, right? And there's a policy response to each of those. Have you looked at that plan, and if there are pieces of it you feel pretty strongly about, what would those be?
I think that the best thing that we can do as a city, and the strongest stance that the local government can take, is working to actively take cars off of the road to combat, I'm less of a combative kind of person, but to address the issue of climate change that we're facing here locally as well as globally, which of course will impact us being so low to the water level, which you would imagine would make it be one of our top concerns. But the top cause, or one of the top causes of carbon emissions locally is from single-person vehicles or just congestion on the roadway. And so one of the ways that we can address that, which I am a strong advocate for, is a fully funded public transportation system in order to maximize the efficiency and the accessibility of the metro buses, alternative forms of transportation like carpool and vanpool, biking, riding, exploring the options of having a rail and a trail to increase access for individuals that way, but also providing incentives for employers and employees to use alternate forms of transportation. There are great models from other cities, specifically San Francisco and the Bay Area, where employers offer benefits and incentives to their employees to use alternate forms of transportation instead of single car vehicles. And that has proven to be amazingly successful. It's taken over 44,000 cars off the road and reduced the carbon emissions by 2.7%, I believe, which was their 2020 goal, and they've already reached it. So
and Cabrillo just made it mandatory to buy a bus pass. So.
Absolutely, but now there's a little problem there, though. It was an interesting situation with that because you have Cabrillo, right, which are tend to be lower income students than those that would go to a university. And you are imposing an extra $40 fee on their tuition. So now if the school was paying for it, that would be fantastic if it was subsidizing the bus fares. But to require low-income students to pay an extra $40 into a service that they may or may not use and is ineffective, to say to say it lightly, is ineffective, is seemingly a smaller Band-Aid solution to a larger problem, which lies in the city infrastructure and the emphasis that the city government puts on public transportation.
Right. So that's a good segue into some more talk about transportation. Clearly, we lost a lot of bus routes just now, and there's a lot of congestion on our streets. So what are some other ideas to make this a more walking, bicycle-friendly place, and any other big ticket items that the city could put into place that would make a big impact on the amount of carbon emissions and also just traffic? It's a pretty big impedance in the middle of the day, all the way till evening.
Absolutely. Of course, encouraging alternate forms like biking, like I'd mentioned before, but really the only option that I see for the city to be able to alleviate the congestion on the roadways is to invest in the fully funded public transportation system. Also, exploring the idea of a rail trail. There's some contention in that area too as to whether it should just be a trail for bikes or whether there should be an included rail, which would then run people from the Pajaro Valley out to Davenport and back again. So it's a tough situation that the Metro is in right now, especially. But it's not something that happened overnight. I think is really important to emphasize here. A lot of people, especially with the upcoming measure on the ballot, a lot of people are, saying if this ballot doesn't pass, then there's going to be Metro cuts, and in a sense, that's true, but it's because of the lack of emphasis and leadership and investment in the infrastructure of public transportation that has gotten us to this point in the first place. And the same thing with the congestion on the roadways, and the same thing with the lack of infrastructure with regards to repairing streets and all that kind of stuff, because streets are getting more use because there are more cars and so on. So.
Right. So there was a lot of focus during this last election cycle on income inequality, and this is a hard place to be poor. There's a large poverty rate in our county. Something like 21% of the children in our county are living under the poverty line. That's a really high number. What could a city council do policy-wise to impact any of that? I know these are bigger sociological forces at work, but we have it in a big way, partly because of the cost of housing.
Yeah, there was this new data that was released recently that identifies the different margins of poverty in specific areas. In Santa Cruz, the top 20% population of Santa Cruz, the wealthiest 20%, control approximately 51% of the overall wealth in Santa Cruz, where the bottom 20% only control about 2.3 approximately percent of the wealth. So as you were saying, there's a vast gap within the economic stability and strength of the individuals in Santa Cruz. I think one thing that we can really work towards as a city council with policy is helping to increase the living, or to enact a living wage, or at least increase the minimum wage, as was already set forth with the mandate in California by 2023, I believe, for smaller businesses. But looking at ways that we may be able to enhance or accelerate that. In addition, there's the issue of union jobs and those kinds of stuff. Like I was speaking to a union member the other day. She's lived in Santa Cruz for 30 years and is getting priced out because, not even priced out, her landlord just gave her an arbitrary lease termination for 90 days. And so she has to move and may or may not be able to stay in Santa Cruz because of the amount of money she's earning. There's an issue with union work not being utilized when it comes to new developments. I was speaking to a member of the Carpenters Union, and they were saying the same thing, where new developments that are coming in are hiring low-wage workers from other cities to come in and do the work here in Santa Cruz. That has negative impacts on multiple levels. Not only is it not providing a living wage, or at least a quality level of wage for that individual coming into town, but it's also taking money out of the community and taking away the potential of allowing a union member to make those funds for their families here in Santa Cruz.
So could the city council project by project require local union workers?
To my understanding, that is a possibility for the city to make that a mandate. I'm not sure if it's per development, or whether it can be a broad stroke among all of the different new developments that are going on, or we can make it so that the city itself is responsible, because I'm not sure about the ability to mandate other developers and the labor they use. However, we will be able to, I think, decide on which developers we go with for developing, and so then that would come into reviewing their decisions and formulating contracts prior to approving of planning.
Right. So let's jump to law enforcement and policing. That's been a big issue nationwide,
Absolutely.
And it's no different here, although maybe we're lucky in some instances not to have had the level of distrust between the populace and the police that has been rising. But I just want your take on how could we do better, and is there a policy response to that as well from the council to its police force? How do you address that at a local level?
Absolutely. So it's an interesting topic, criminal justice and police accountability and all that kind of stuff. I would tend to almost not disagree, but I would challenge the idea that there is not that level of distrust within the community here in Santa Cruz with our local police department. I know that the sheriff has made great strides to become more community oriented with 21st century policing and working with different community groups and everything. However, I do know that at the most recent report back for the community policing, while there were representatives from other police departments, the Santa Cruz Police Department, I do not believe had a representative there. Now, ways that the city council can help to alleviate that or address those issues, I would be, and I am, a strong advocate of a police review board, but a police review board that has some ability to investigate effectively. I, myself have filed complaints against police officers, specifically higher up administrators, and that process was probably the least fulfilling complaint process I've ever experienced. And this is from me, who's an individual who I like to consider myself articulate. I have some level of education. I understand the process of going in. I don't have a warrant out for my arrest or any kind of issue, so I can go in confidently and address the police officers and talk to them. So if I had that kind of an experience, can you imagine what it would be like to be someone who did not have access to such a level, to any level of education, or a lower level of education, who has had issues with law enforcement, who is mentally requires mental care or some kind of mental health need? Like what is their experience and where is their level of comfort? So having a police review board that is populated by community members, that has the ability to do investigations and follow through on complaints with police, I think is a good first step. But then there are many other ways moving forward that we can look at.
Right. So back to the area of crime. I don't know where we are in terms of going up or down, but it's often an issue that's bantied about, and it can be sometimes mixed in with fear of homeless people.
Absolutely.
What are the real crime issues we're actually facing? You know, I've heard property crime is one of the main banes of existence, of people just having their homes and cars broken into by druggies. So how do you deal with some of the most prevalent crime issues? There's community groups that try to do community policing. What other ways can communities and city councils inspire a more proactive stance so that people can make their neighborhoods safer and better places to live and not be afraid?
Great question. So there are a few things. I'm glad you asked, though, because there is an aspect of my campaign which kind of sets me apart a little bit from some of the other ones that are out there, and that is the idea of creating what I call a climate of compassion. And so that's looking at increasing access to social services like healthcare, childcare, education, all those kinds of issues that can create situations where people are turning to crime or other illicit activities because they don't have access to them. But then also within that platform aspect of creating a climate of compassion, I'm asking people in general, what is genuine public safety? Dealing with crimes, dealing with thefts and all of that. Are the solutions to those problems and the solutions to houselessness? You know, and by the way, you'll notice I'll use the term houseless throughout the interview instead of homeless. The root causes of crime are poverty and inequality. So just going off of that statistic that I said before about the massive gap of inequality here in Santa Cruz, tied in with the lack of housing, tied in with the lack of social services that we see available to the larger swath of the community. Does genuine public safety look like an inflated police budget with militarized vehicles and machine guns and riot gear, which are very expensive, by the way? Or is it addressing those root causes of crime, increasing social services, reaching out to those people that are in need, that are suffering, that are the most marginalized and kind of pushed to the side of society, and saying, hey, we're here to help you. Here are some options of ways you can get involved. Here's some housing to get you off the street. Here are some offers, not forced, but here are some offers of mental health care, drug addiction issues. You know, those kinds of things I think would have a dramatic increase or a dramatic impact on the amount of not only crime that we see locally, but also in the amount of houseless individuals that we encounter every day.
It sounds like you're talking, if I'm not mistaken, of a more integrated system with social services and law enforcement working more closely together, perhaps?
Absolutely. You know, with Project Pollinate, the organization, we use bees as a centralizing topic to show the interconnectedness of the ecosystem, right? So how bees pollinate the food and the food comes to us and plants and flowers. So what we also do is we take that model of interconnectedness and we put it on top of social issues. And so that's exactly what we're talking about here, is it's not one or the other. It's not, do we increase this or decrease that? It's looking at the entire picture of what is going on in our community and then addressing it holistically. And is that, like I mentioned before, is that more of this or less of this? Or is that less of this and more of this? And then that's where being a local city council member, that's where an advocate, and that's what being able to work with the city staff and all of the other individuals on the council will be geared towards, is identifying those issues, as well as working with local community groups, because that's one thing as well that I feel is not happening on the current city council, and it hasn't happened for a while, is taking in the opinion of the community, taking in the opinion of these groups that have worked so diligently on their issues, and then making a decision based off of that. I call it inclusionary politics. And so really making sure to have an open door policy, coordinating meetings and asking for input from these individuals that are passionate and experienced.
And that may alleviate some of the yelling that happens at council meetings, which nobody likes.
Right, exactly. And you know,
maybe some people do, but the council members have a hard time, and I would too.
Yeah, as I do as well.
The civility of the dialogue has got to be improved to get us forward. One of the things, I'm really interested in what you're saying of integrating things the way they haven't been. And you have some longtime members on there who have been here on and off the council for decades. you have new ideas. How do you break through? We've always done it this way. We can't do that. It's too new and radical. How would you try to break through some of that, what is provincial is thinking that could be in place because of long-standing relationships?
Yeah, relationships. And established relationships. That's a really interesting reality in local politics as well, especially with my stances. It's great that you would mention that, because making these suggestions that are outside of the box to certain people have made it seemingly more difficult for me to get the endorsements of established politicians in Santa Cruz, because I am breaking out of the business as normal model, which is really interesting. But we're at a great turning point right now in local politics, because the Santa Cruz City Council is made up of 7 people. Right now, there are 4 seats up for election, right? And only 1 incumbent running. So that means there are at least 3 seats, but ideally 4 seats that are available to be taken over by individuals like myself that have these progressive, community-based, environmentally conscious values. And if that is possible, when that happens, and we have a majority on the council, that's when those new groundbreaking, outside-the-box, innovative ideas can actually be put into place. So it's really important that anyone who's listening to this, go out and participate in local politics. Find a candidate you really appreciate and join their team. Especially the progressive, innovative thinking candidate needs the support from the community, because not only do we need the help in getting the message out to let people know that there is another option besides business as usual, we need the assistance in raising the money in which to coordinate a really successful campaign. Now, luckily, they lowered the amount that you can spend in Santa Cruz, and it's a voluntary spending limit or anything. But just to put it in perspective, it's $38,000, approximately $38,700 maximum that you can spend. And I'm pretty sure that some of my peers will reach close to that. I know that the first check-in, there was someone that would have already raised $15,000. To put that in perspective, you can build a school in a refugee camp in Sudan for $30,000. So we're spending more on this local political campaign than it would cost to educate starving, impoverished individuals in a country that is torn by war. So.
Yeah. How about that?
Yeah.
Amazing. So it's an interesting time in politics where a lot of young people got involved, and we only have 2 more minutes left. So in the final thoughts there of your campaign, do you have people working with you that are of that age group that just got into this because of perhaps people like Bernie Sanders or other candidates that spoke to them about things that matter to the future?
Absolutely. My campaign is built of a huge spread of demographics of individuals. We have people fresh into college, fresh out of college, retired, across the board, and specifically those individuals within that demographic of the millennials. So anyone that is within voting age 18 to 30 right now. They're the ones that are really driving the campaign with me. My campaign manager is 23 years old. He's a wonderful guy. He's got a degree in geology and environmental sciences, but because of what's been going on the political spectrum nationally, because of the organization that's been going on locally here in Santa Cruz with people like Sean Olger Olson and Eric Erickson and some of the other young leaders that have really stepped forward, that is what is really going to help us achieve the goal of those, the majority of 4 progressive city council members. It's going to be the students at the university, it's going to be the students down here in Santa Cruz, and it's going to be the millennials.
Wow, well, it sounds like you're really fired up and excited, and I appreciate you taking the time out of your campaign to talk to me.
I appreciate the opportunity, so thank you very much.
Drew Glover, thank you so much.
Yeah.
You too.